Good evening. I am here in the iconic Friendship Circle headquarters, international headquarters in West Bloomfield, Michigan, which has a very direct connection to the 30 Letters in 30 Days initiative. And although he's squirming in his seat no more than 5 feet from me, anticipating being called out in a positive way in public, my dear friend Rebbe Shem Tov, who with his wife Basi were really the ones who spearheaded this initiative and turned it from a fantasy into a reality. Last year, when we spoke about the idea of learning 30 letters in 30 days, and I had all types of excuses why it wasn't really feasible, they took away all those excuses. So here I am in the place where it all started, and we're learning a letter. I also want to mention that tonight's class is dedicated in honor of Rabbi Meir Shmukler, השליח, Rebbe מאיר Eilizer ben Reyzel Rivka, whose birthday is tonight, tomorrow, Chof Adar, and he should have a year blessed with much success and blessing for him and his family and his personal life, as well as all that he does for the public, including his leadership of the Jets School in Los Angeles, which is a great asset to not only Los Angeles, but really to the entire world. Someone's asking in the chat, am I davening at the shul tomorrow? No, I'm going to be flying at 6 a.m. tomorrow so that I can get back to the 5 towns to give my Tanya Shir at Levi Yitzchak Library. So that's the way the cookie crumbles. Okay, letter number 9. Baruch Hashem Chof Alef Kislev, Tafshin Yud Tes. We are out of Cheshvan, and we are, someone's texting here in the chat, I was at Jest for 3 years. It was truly life-changing. Well, then call Rabbi Shmukler and wish him a happy birthday, please. All right. Okay. We are out of Tishrei. Remember, our first letter we started was Erev Rosh Hashanah. Then we went through Tishrei. We did some letters from Cheshvan. Now we're in Kislev. We're moving right along. Brooklyn. Bracha v'shalom. You know what bracha v'shalom means? It tips us off that Rebbe is writing to a woman. And if you didn't know it from the bracha v'shalom, you would know it as the Rebbe continues. It's pretty clear that Rebbe is speaking to a mother. And as was not uncommon during that era when the Rebbe would write to women, the letters in Yiddish. The Mama Lashon. It's called Mama Lashon for a reason. And the Rebbe is writing to a Yiddish mama in the Mama Lashon. So we have a nice Yiddish letter to a Yiddish mama here. And it is about the kinds of things that a Jewish mother would be concerned with. Let's jump right in. In Entfer of Eier Brief von Chai Kislev, in answer to your letter from the 18th day of Kislev. So this is 3 days later. And if anyone knows anything about the Chabad calendar, you would understand that the Lubavitcher Rebbe would be a little bit busy during those couple of days between the 18th of Kislev and the 21st of Kislev. Of course, the 19th of Kislev and the 20th of Kislev are auspicious days on the Chabad calendar, the Rosh Hashanah L'Chassidus, the Rebbe would Fabreng. You could go look up that year, Tafshin Yud Tes, and you can see the Rebbe's Fabrengen. So he was obviously busy with preparing for that. I'm saying just on a practical level, I'm not even getting into any spiritual preparations that the Rebbe would have done. That it's not something that I can even begin to fathom. So 3-day turnaround for that time of year is pretty good. Okay, so the Rebbe says in response to your letter from Chai Kislev, in welchen ihr schreibt wegen Gesundzustand von die Kinder shiyichyu, in which you write about your children's health situation. Stop, before we go on. Fathom what I'm about to tell you. Try to wrap your head around this. Last night we had a letter, was it last night? Yeah. To a Israeli judge, a shofet from the Israeli judicial system. A few nights ago, we had a letter to the leader of the Jewish conservative movement in America. We've had letters to all types of influential people. And just wrap your head around the fact that the same Rebbe who is writing to these influential people, these leaders, these public figures, the same Rebbe is writing to a mother about her children's health. And as we're going to read, the children, Baruch Hashem, are fine. Nobody's sick. They're healthy, but she's a little bit concerned that maybe they're finicky eaters. Just stop a second and wrap your head around that idea that a mother would even think that she could write to the Rebbe about her children being finicky eaters. And that not only she would think she could write to the Rebbe, but the Rebbe would actually answer her. The same Rebbe who is in correspondence, and if you remember the letter to Finkelstein the other night, the Rebbe even told him, why am I corresponding with you? Because you're influential, and it's important for me to capitalize on those very powerful relationships with influential people, because the situation right now in the Jewish world is very urgent, and that's why I need to make the most of every one of these networking opportunities with people who are of influence. So the same Rebbe who is thinking globally about how can I find another influential leader and influence that leader to influence others, the same Rebbe is taking letters and responding to them from women who are asking for advice about their children's eating habits. That is absolutely mind-boggling. Okay, so let's read further. So you write about your children's health situation. Und verendigt mit der Frage, and you end your letter with a question. So basically, she described the situation, and then she ended with a question. Wie zu handeln behanagea zu a nit mehuderdicken Michael. How to deal with a less than perfectly kosher food. That's how I'll translate that. Nit mehuderdicken Michael. That mehuder means not just within the letter of the law, but beyond the letter of the law. Mehuder means to beautify the mitzvah, to do it extra meticulously. So the woman is writing to the Rebbe and saying, I want to know if I can give my children this food that is not outright treif. It's not absolutely white forbidden, but it's just a little bit less than the most scrupulous, punctilious standards of Kashrus. So that's what we're talking about, which just further amplifies how mind-boggling this is. Because, first of all, the Rebbe is speaking not to a global leader, but from the Rebbe's worldview, by the way, a mother is a global leader. So, but not to someone we would think of as a global leader. But the Rebbe is taking the time to write to this mother about her children. And furthermore, not only is it a mother of children, but the issue at hand is not even a black and white Kashrus question. It's about a level of being meticulous in the mitzvah of Kashrus. In other words, there's many exacerbating factors here where somebody could just say, you know what, this is way too trivial for the Lubavitcher Rebbe to have to focus and get involved in this. And yet the Rebbe is involved and writes an entire letter. Okay, so you're asking what to do about this less than perfectly kosher food. Und ihr rechnet, als der Michael kann zugeben Appetit für die Kinder. And the reason you're even talking about it is because you think that this particular food, I don't know what it is, but it's a little bit less than perfectly kosher, that you think that it could increase the appetite of the children. So like I said, it sounds like the children were finicky eaters. They were not eating as much as the mother would want. And as you know, with Jewish mothers, there's always concern about whether the children are eating enough, right? You know about the new Jewish ship, the SS Mein Kind, right? It's an old one. So she's worried about the children not having enough of an appetite. And apparently there was this food that would be yummier, or maybe would provoke more of their appetite and would get them to eat more. And it was not overtly prohibited, but it was a little bit less than her normal high standards. And so she asked the Rebbe if it would be okay to start using this food to get the children to eat a little bit more. Okay. Bichlal is hider in my cholim, wie es wird erklärt in mehr Erter, negea nicht nur in der Mitzvah Abhittung. In general, being extra scrupulous about food, as explained in many places, is not just germane to the performance of the mitzvah itself. Okay, there's the performance of the mitzvah itself. Did you do the mitzvah? Didn't you do the mitzvah? And even within doing the mitzvah, how well did you do the mitzvah? Okay, that's one thing, the mitzvah itself. But then there's another factor that Rebbe brings up, but rather, not just the mitzvah, but wie bald es von jeder Meichel wird noch Blut und Fleisch von Guf. From every food that you eat, it becomes blood and flesh of your body, welcher verbindt sich mit der Neshama, and the body is connected to the soul, is die Kashrus und Edelkeit von dem Meicholim. So therefore, the kosher status and the spiritual refinement of the food. See, the Rebbe says Kashrus und Edelkeit. It's not just Kashrus, which is legal or not legal. Edelkeit is levels of refinement. So the level of spiritual refinement of the food wird auf dem Charakter und mides Teufels von dem, welcher benutzt sich mit dem Meichel. It affects the character and it affects the traits of the person who eats the food. So it's not just a question of did you do the mitzvah, or even how well did you do the mitzvah. There's another factor involved, which is the after effect. How the food will affect you after the mitzvah when it becomes flesh and blood and becomes your body, which your body in turn is connected to your soul, and there it's going to affect your character traits and your disposition. So kashrus of food has a very special quality that we don't find by other mitzvahs. By other mitzvahs, it's always a question of did you do the mitzvah or didn't you do the mitzvah? But with kashrus, there's the ongoing effect of how well the mitzvah was done. Okay. Und der Rebbe, therefore, because of this quality, is jeder Zugab in dem Hider, Edelkeit und Reinkeit von dem Meichel. So therefore, every addition you can make in making the food more scrupulously, meticulously kosher, more refined, more pure, every bit that you can make it just a little bit better, darf euch betrachten werden wie Zugebung in der, let me do this long word here, Ausgestaltung und Feinkeit und Edelkeit von Charakter und Midas. So every little bit you can add on to making the food more kosher, even beyond the letter of the law, that should also be considered as adding to improving upon the makeup and the decency and the refinement of the character and the traits of the person who eats it. So there's a lot more at stake than just how the mitzvah was done. It's what effect that mitzvah is going to have. And it's not binary. It's not all or nothing. It's not did you do it or didn't you do it. Because of the effect that kashrus has on the person, so as good is better, nicht besser. If good is good, isn't better, better. If you can get the food more refined, more muhudder, so then it's going to create character traits which are more refined and more spiritual and more sensitive. There's a famous story that involves the great Torah scholar from the early 1800s, Rebbe Eger, great genius, Rebbe Eger. And he once came to a town, he visited, and among the people who sought him and wanted to meet him and receive his blessings and his guidance was a mother of 9 children. And this mother of 9 comes to Rebbe Eger and says she has a problem with one of her boys. Baruch Hashem, they're all smart boys. They're all succeeding in learning, except for one of them. He's a smart boy, but for some funny reason, he just can't learn Gemara. He tries to learn, he just doesn't chap. And she doesn't know what's wrong. He's 14 years old, and he's not able to learn Gemara. And he is a bright boy. So what's going on? So Rebbe Eger says to the mother, her name was Ethel, by the way. He says to the mother, to Ethel, you should look into whether maybe this child ate non-kosher food, because non-kosher food is mitamtim. It plugs up spiritually. It congests. It makes dull the heart and the mind. Well, her husband was with her and said, our children never ate out of the house. They only ate what we fed them, and our house is completely kosher. So Rebbe Eger said, nevertheless, you should look into it, because that's probably the problem. And they said, well, what can we do about it now? And he said, well, if he'll continue to learn with devotion and push through it till he'll overcome it. So they had the solution already, but it was bothering them that Rebbe Eger would even imply that their child had not eaten kosher food. So they actually went to this kid. I said he was like 14 years old. And they asked him, did you ever eat outside of our house? And he's like, no. And they're like, think really hard. Did you ever eat outside of our house? He's like, oh, you know what? 10 years ago, when I was a little kid, I was coming home from Cheder. Yeah. And a group of us were walking past the hotel. And somebody said, Yingalach, little boys, come over here and have some soup. And we ate some chicken soup. And I remember it very well because it was the second night of Hanukkah, and there was a wedding at the hotel, and that's what we ate from. So the parents were shocked, first of all. They didn't know that this had ever happened. But then they were relieved because they said, hold on a second. We know that hotel. The hotel is kosher. We know that the hotel only uses one sheichet, one ritual slaughterer, and we know his work to be impeccable. So it shouldn't really be a problem. But the father was sort of worried. So he went to the hotel owner and he said, could you look up 10 years ago if there was a wedding on the second night of Hanukkah? And could you see if there's anything about that would be interesting? So the hotel owner actually had a calendar, book of all the past bookings that they had done. And he looked back and said, oh yeah, I see. Yeah, second night of Hanukkah was like 10 years ago. And he said, he's the name of this guy, so-and-so. He named the guy, a local guy that they knew. And it was his second marriage. So the father hears this. He's like, oh, man, that's not good. I know that guy. He's a very crass guy. That guy, I remember he got divorced, and then he got remarried. And he's not such. But hold on a second. He didn't prepare the food. The hotel prepared the food. The hotel owner is a God-fearing Jew. And the sheichet, remember, there's only one sheichet who would shecht for the hotel. He's a God-fearing Jew. So it really shouldn't matter that this guy who was kind of crass was the one who was the chassan, who was the groom in this wedding. But the father still, he he knew there was something more to it, so he couldn't leave it alone. He came over to him and he said, "Do you remember 10 years ago, second night of Hanukkah, and you prepared meat for the wedding celebration of so and so?" He named the guy for his second marriage. And the sheikhet, the ritual slaughterer, says, "Oy vey, why are you reminding me of such painful things? I don't want to talk about this, please. Why are you talking about this?" The father says, "What? Well, tell me what I need to know. I need to know if there's something there." So he says, yes, but it wasn't really my fault. I didn't really understand. You should know also the shechita itself, the actual slaughtering was 100% kosher. Everything was done correctly. That wasn't the problem. Okay, what was the problem? So the sheikhet says, "Okay, I'll tell you what happened. I did the shechita for that wedding party. I prepared the chickens. Everything was normal. Everything was kosher. It was all good. A few days later, I'm walking down the street, and a local Chabad chassid walks up to me and says, 'How could you sell out for a few bucks, for a few dollars? How do you sell out?' And I said, 'What do you mean I sold out? What did I do wrong?' And this Chabad chassid said, 'You prepared the chickens for that wedding.' He says, 'Yeah, I did. They hired me to do it, and there was 100% kosher.' So the Chabad chassid said, 'You're not aware of the problem with that?' He said, 'No, I'm not aware of any problem with that.' The Chabad chassid pulled out a letter, and he showed it to the sheikhet. The sheikhet read it. To his horror, it said, this guy, the chassan, the groom from this wedding, gave his first wife a get, a bill of divorce, and it was pasul, it was invalid. And the rabbis all knew it was invalid, and they told this guy that you were obligated to reissue a kosher bill of divorce. And the guy was recalcitrant. He said, 'I don't care. I'm not going to do it.' And he ignored the rabbis, and they told him that until you fix it, you cannot get remarried. And he said, 'I'm going to get remarried anyway.' And he went to another town, and he got remarried. And so the Alter Rebbe writes in this letter that everybody should know that this guy is not allowed to get remarried until he gives a proper bill of divorce to his first wife. And therefore, the Alter Rebbe says, I am forbidding any sheikhet to prepare food for the wedding meal of this marriage until the first divorce is properly dealt with. So the father realized that the kashrus of the food wasn't even the actual kashrus of the food. The food itself was okay, but because the Alter Rebbe had said that no one should provide food, no sheikhet should provide meat for this meal, that itself, that rabbinic ban, already had an effect on the food, so that even that unwitting child, whether you think this is justice or it's not, maybe this is even off-putting to some of you to hear this, like, how could this innocent child, unwittingly, he didn't even know what he was doing. Okay, but I don't know something, if some negligent person put out poison, God forbid, and a child drank the poison, even though it's totally not the child's fault, the child's innocent. It's the negligent person who's at fault for leaving poison out where a child can get it. But don't tell me just because the child's innocent that the poison won't affect the child. Of course it will, God forbid. And that's the same thing that happened here. That food was under a certain rabbinic ban. And even though the food itself was kosher, the slaughter itself was kosher, but because of that negative spiritual energy attached to the food, it had that effect on that boy even 10 years later. So we see how the kashrus of food can have far-ranging ramifications. And it's not even just when we're talking about black and white letter of the law, kosher or not kosher. We're even talking about quote unquote technicalities of kashrus. Okay. So the Rebbe is telling this mother, I want you to be careful, and I want you to always try to make things as kosher as possible, even to go beyond and beyond and beyond, because everything you do to be more and more kosher with the food you give your children is just giving them better and better character traits. Okay. Und ob das ist by Erwachsener Menschen, and if this is true by adults, if this situation, this phenomenon occurs with adults, which it does, is das in a noch viel größere Maß by Kinder. It's in a much greater way by children. Was their Charakter hält sich in Vermehrung. Their character is still developing. So an adult even would be affected by the kashrus of their food. Their character traits would be affected by the kashrus of their food. How much more so a child whose personality is still developing. Und der Rebbe is gar wichtig. Therefore, it is very important. In was für eine Richtung man führt sie in them. What direction you take them. Meaning, as far as the kashrus of their food. Okay, next paragraph. Leut das eben Gesagte, according to the above mentioned, is verständlich mein Meinung. My opinion is understood. Als wie bald es handelt sich nicht chas v'sholem in an inyan, wo der ganze Gesund is abhängig in them. Since we're not talking about a situation where the child's whole health situation is hanging in the balance, I want to clarify here something very important. We know that pikuach nefesh, that saving a life, pushes off everything, except for the three cardinal sins. And there's a concept, bakoil misrapin, that you're allowed to heal, use for healing purposes, anything except for those three cardinal sins. And if it were really a life-saving issue, if this child were, God forbid, critically ill, then, like it says very clearly in Shulchan Aruch and Yeridea Kuf Nun Hey, that if it's a serious critical situation, then you're even allowed to consume kosher food by eating it in the normal way. I mean, even someone who's less sick could consume it, not eating it in the normal way, like maybe in a capsule or something where they don't actually taste it. But somebody who's critically ill, they could even eat non-kosher food if that's what it takes to heal them. So certainly, Torah preserves life. V'chai bohem, the mitzvahs are meant to keep us alive, not to, God forbid, end our lives. So certainly, if this were a real health situation where the child's general health were at risk, it would be a different judgment call here. But the Rebbe reminds the mother, and I would say reassures her and calms her and says, we're not talking about such a situation. We're not talking about where the child's general health is at risk. Chas v'sholem, the Rebbe adds. God forbid, we're not talking about such a situation. In an Inyan, wo der ganze Gesund is abhängig in them, right? Und es ist mehr nicht wie zugeben in Tam und Starkung. Really, all we're talking about is adding in a little tam, that means taste, or in this case, maybe appetite and strength. Okay, we're not talking about a child who's critically ill and that they need non-kosher food to save their life. That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about there's a child who's being a little bit finicky in their eating, and by compromising in kashrus, maybe they'd enjoy that food a little bit more and end up eating more. Okay, I hear you. I understand the question. It's not really a compelling reason to compromise in kashrus, knowing what we know about the effects that kashrus have on the child and on their personality. So, in the context of this whole discussion, it's not so advisable, the Rebbe says. But the Rebbe explains why. And again, the Lubavitcher Rebbe is busy. And he's writing to a mother about how to deal with her finicky eater children. And the Rebbe could even just write one line like, no, don't give them that food that you wanted to give them. But the Rebbe writes a whole letter and explains the reasoning why not to compromise. Okay. Yeah. So in such a case, darf man nicht verkleinern dem hider von dem eicholim. You should not decrease the hider. Again, the Rebbe uses that word hider, the meticulousness of the kashrus of the food. Don't give up, don't forego that extra meticulous level of kashrus observance. Und sicher kann man gefinnen andere Eitzes. For sure, you could find other solutions, und Wegen and other means, wie zu starken dem Appetit, how to strengthen the children's appetite. The Rebbe doesn't give her any suggestions, but the Rebbe says, I'm sure, mother, you're going to find it. Just go look, you'll figure it out. Okay. Und zu machen die Kinder gesinnter, and you'll figure out ways how to make the children more healthy. Nit auf ein Cheshbon von Kashrus v'hider, in ways that will not compromise again, the Rebbe uses the word Kashrus v'hider, not just regular kashrus, but you won't even have to compromise the meticulous level of observance of kashrus, and you'll be able to have the best of both worlds. You'll have the kashrus, which will therefore facilitate really rich, good character traits to develop in your child. And I'm sure you'll figure out a way to deal with the finicky eating and get them to eat enough that they'll plump up to your liking. Bivrachal, b'suras teves, with blessing, for good tidings, good news. B'shem kved kedusas admar shlita mazkir, and this was not signed by the Rebbe, was signed by the secretariat of the Rebbe. And that is our letter for tonight. An incredible glimpse into the Rebbe's personal touch. You know, I'll just add a little glimpse behind the scenes. Before we started 30 Letters in 30 Days last year, talking about the first time last year, so there was this argument. What 30 letters should we choose? Levi Shem Tov standing right here. He can hear me. So there was this argument. And one side of the argument said, let's get 30 bombshell letters, like famous letters to famous people. We'll get like the letter to Elie Wiesel. We'll get the letter to Ben Tzvi. We'll get the letter to Ariel Sharon. We'll get like, famous letters that are, top billing on the marquee. And that was one approach. And then another approach was, you know what? Let's just go through one volume of Igros and take a representative cross-section of the various different types of letters that you would find in one volume of Igros. And included in that will be letters that would not make a top 30 list, because they're not bombshell letters. They're not written to famous people. They don't have any earth-shattering news in them. But they're important to include so that one gains a glimpse into all the different types of situations and the different lives and the different people that the Rebbe was connecting with during that time. So that was that second approach. That was the approach of Levi Shem Tov, who's sitting right here off camera. Yeah, he's getting annoyed by this. And he said that there are letters that are very understated, maybe even would seem, pedestrian, just regular, too normal. And you wouldn't necessarily think to include it in a top 30. But in that itself, there's a certain Reichkeit, there's a certain depth that you get where you say, if you stop and you think about it and you say, wow, the same Rebbe who is dealing with such huge issues is also writing to a mother, advising her how to deal with her children's finicky eating habits. And it is mind-blowing. And Levi Shem Tov was right about this and about a lot of things, and he's making me stop. Okay, fine. Okay, we're ending the stream. We're ending this stream. Okay. And happy birthday again, Mayor Shmukler.